Today, teachers at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, the site of the deadly mass shooting nearly 2 weeks ago, began the process of trying to get back to normal, if that's even possible. And yesterday, students returned to the school to gather the things they left behind when 17 of their classmates and teachers were gunned down in preparation for classes on Wednesday. As that difficult journey begins, we're learning more about the missteps that began long before Nicholas Cruz, the alleged killer, opened fire. And the list is long. According to the Broward County Sheriff's Office, 23 calls were made about Cruz's behavior or his potential for violence. Last week, it was revealed one of those calls came from here in Massachusetts, where the tipster claimed Cruz could be a, quote, school shooter in the making. The FBI also received at least 2 tips about ominous posts on social media, including one last month where he allegedly wrote, "I want to kill people." Students also reported behavior they say they saw. This on top of the shocking revelation made last week that the armed sheriff's deputy posted at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas never went into the building, something Broward County Sheriff Israel admits could have made a difference.
Yes, if Scott Peterson went into, do I believe if Scott Peterson went into that building, there was a chance he could have neutralized the killer and saved lives? Yes, I believe that.
The officer has since resigned, and calls for the sheriff to also step down are getting louder as the misread flags pile up. Over the weekend, Israel defended his department and said he will not resign.
I can only take responsibility for what I knew about. I exercised my due diligence. I've given amazing leadership to this agency.
Amazing leadership?
I've worked, yes, Jake.
But it's that due diligence that's in question tonight. So how far should and how far can law enforcement go to prevent a tragedy? That question is being asked here, too, after a 22-year-old woman was stabbed to death at the Winchester Public Library. Her alleged attacker and his violent behavior were known to police. Joining me are Ron Sullivan, Harvard Law Professor and Director of the Criminal Justice Institute at Harvard. Ron, it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
And Chief Brian Keyes of the Chelsea Police Department. Chief, it's good to meet you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
How can so many responsible people, social services, local cops, FBI, you can, the list is endless. How can so many responsible people and institutions fail to follow up on so many clear warnings, Chief?
Yeah, this is, it's pretty unbelievable. I mean, initially I thought when the information came out, I thought perhaps there was one missed call, which is one too many certainly, but just it seems like every day there's something else, and how the dots were not connected, I just can't understand it.
Why should I or somebody at home believe that this is not the norm in cases that are lower profile, that leads are called in and people say he's a possible shooter, she's a possible shooter,
Sure.
And police and law enforcement just ignore the warnings?
Sure. I mean, this is something that we follow up on all the time. I mean, police officers across the country, the Federal Bureau of Investigation as well. These are things that mean a lot, and you really got to go the extra mile, and you can't just blow something off and say it's not important. You really have to follow up.
Do you find this to be an aberration? I hope it's an aberration. Or is it more normal than police officials want us to believe?
Well, I think it's more normal, not necessarily than police officials want us to believe. I don't think we know the denominator, and that's an important fact.
Meaning what?
How many of these sorts of calls we get, or law enforcement gets. And they get a ton, I would imagine, and human beings make decisions. They sort of triage and figure out what they think is most important.
Well, there's limited person power, obviously.
Limited person power. And here's why I think we should use big data to our benefit. And that way, these dots, to use the chief's term, could connect a lot better. That's a responsible use of big data in the criminal justice system.
Is that what the solution is? I mean, obviously, another solution is a lot more money, which is not forthcoming, to ensure that you have more officers, Broward County has more officers. But short of that, is that part of the answer?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I'll tell you the truth, Tom. I don't think it's money. I think, if there was a tip that came in today, if there was 10 tips that come in today, you investigate every single one of them. That's what you do.
You investigate every tip that comes into your office?
Absolutely.
What does investigate mean?
Well, it depends what the tip is. I mean, if it's a tip that it involves a young man or a young person that has access to a gun and they're talking about, creating violence or shooting up a school, that is at the top of the list.
Should a parent, I know you're not there and you only know from afar as we do, but this is your business, this is what you do for a living.
Correct.
Should a parent feel that their kid is safe going to a school in Broward County this week?
Well, something, I don't know enough about it. I would hope that they would, but I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I know that there was an officer in that school, assigned to that school. What happened is disappointing from what I'm hearing, from what the sheriff is stating, certainly. But ordinarily, I mean, the schools are locked. There's one way in, there's one way out, and the offices are there to keep people safe.
Speaking of school resource officers, Scott Peterson is the person you're talking about. I mentioned resigned. You have school resource officers in Chelsea, do you not?
We do.
What's the protocol for these people if there was a similar situation? My understanding is post-Columbine, active shooter protocol, not securing the perimeter.
Correct.
You go in.
Correct.
Is that not it?
It is. I mean, I don't. Again, with the circumstances in Florida, why he was outside is a
Well,
little,
yeah, I don't know if you know,
puzzling.
today his statement through his lawyer or somebody is, I thought the shots were outside. And with all due respect to him, if that was the answer, we would have heard it 4 days ago from the union leader. I think this is created by a lawyer after the fact to do a CYA kind of thing.
Sure.
But short of that, that's the protocol. You go in, even though your life may be at risk. That's the job you decided to take.
That is correct. Post-Columbine, the training right now is to have a contact team. If you're one officer, you could be that team. You engage the shooter. You eliminate the threat. That's what you're trained to do.
You know, the President of the United States was asked about this today. He was meeting with governors. In addition to saying he thought the behavior of Scott Peterson was disgusting, he also went on to say what he said he would do under similar circumstances.
You know, I really believe, you don't know until you test it, but I think I really believe I'd run in there even if I didn't have a weapon. And I think most of the people in this room would have done that too, because I know most of you.
I don't know if there's anything you can really say
Not
about
a lot.
that. That is what the President of the United States had to say. Broward County Sheriff. I mean, you heard him say before, he was a national hero for those who believe in gun control. A couple of days ago, the initial reaction in that CNN town hall when he sat next to Dana Loesch from the National Rifle Association. But his self-grading was he did an amazing job. He acknowledges there was at least one cop who didn't go in. The Coral Gables police say there were up to 3 additional ones. He's denying that. If there were additional cops, 2, 3, whatever, does this guy not need to go?
Well, it's hard for me to comment directly on whether he needs to stay or go, but I just know this, that if in fact there were 1, 2, 3, 4 officers there and there's a sound of gunfire inside that school, their job is to go in. Why they didn't go in, I mean, these facts have to come out. I have no idea. It makes no sense why they would not go in.
But if there's no good reason, I know you don't want to weigh in, but in your own situation, if you had, again, a comparable situation, let's hope it never happens, in Chelsea, and your own men and women didn't go in, isn't the responsible thing to say, the buck stops with me, I got to go?
It's a good point. That's a good point.
So how about this other thing that's been so controversial? We know the president has said, and a bunch of mostly Republican elected officials, with a couple of Democrats as well, have said one of the solutions is arm the teachers. Where are you on that, Ron?
I think it's a mistake. So it is a contestable policy position. I think it is a mistake bringing more guns into that situation. I think it's a mistake. I think it's a better use of resources to attempt to keep the guns out of the schools, out of the hands of teenagers, rather than putting more guns. Well, out of the hands of the teenagers who may come in and do harm. But with more people who aren't specifically trained, day in, day out, routinely trained to use those firearms, I think you're courting disaster.
Do you agree with that?
100%. 100%. I think the reality is that if teachers have a tough enough job as it is, their job is certainly to keep these kids safe, and God forbid something happens, to show them the way out of the school, but to put more guns in that school, to have officers rushing into that school not knowing who the shooter is and who the shooter isn't, is very, very dangerous.
They might end up shooting one of the teachers
Of course.
or one of the people.
Absolutely.
You know, also, I don't do what you guys do, but it seems to me if Scott Peterson, for whatever reason, with service in the military and 33 years in the police force, apparently made a wrong decision, the notion that a teacher is going to be able to make the correct decision despite their desire is preposterous.
In those similarly heated situations, that's a really tough situation for a civilian to be in. So I think you're right. That's a lot to ask.
Can we go from Parkland to Winchester? Today at the arraignment of the man, Jeffrey Yao, who's accused of killing Deanne Kenny Stryker, J.W. Carney, who you've heard his name, he represented Whitey Bulger, is the lawyer for Yao here. Here's what he had to say about his client.
His mental illness has often been quite apparent, and he's had a lot of contact with the Winchester police over the years.
You know, Chief, there's a lot of parallels, I would argue, between this case and the Nicholas Cruz case. Lots of warnings. People saying, we told the police this. In the situation of Winchester, police were called. One of the things they said in the Boston Globe is, and they said to families who complained to them there, don't worry, he's on a watch list. What does that mean in English in Massachusetts in 2018?
That's a good question. I'm not too sure. I read that myself. I'm not too sure. I know that the reality is that, you know, when someone comes forward, whether it's a parent or a friend or a concerned neighbor, that someone has an issue, the police are not watching that person per se, certainly not 24 hours a day. It's a little unclear to me exactly what that was meant or what someone meant by that, whether it's taken out of context, I'm not sure.
Do you have any greater clarity on what a watch list is?
I don't, besides being on a list and police sort of keep an eye out informally on an individual, but no.
You know, there's tons of, I mean, there clearly, I shouldn't say clearly, it appears to me that there are mental illness issues both with Yao and with Chris. It's not to excuse, it's just a statement of fact. Do you think people like you are too concerned about protecting the privacy rights of individuals to the detriment of his ability to protect our public safety?
I don't think so. I will say that there is a tension. That is to say, there are costs associated with living in a free and open society. The Constitution is all about preventing the reach of the state, limiting the reach of the state. But citizens actually want police to prevent crime. So there is a tension there, and the question is to creatively attempt to harmonize that tension.
Let me stay with you for a second. The Civil Liberties Union here, not here, nationally, joined, interestingly, with the National Rifle Association to support the repeal of something Barack Obama signed into law. Let me read the statement from the ACLU. We oppose the rule, I'll explain what it is in a minute, because it advances and reinforces the harmful stereotype that people with mental disabilities, a vast and diverse group of citizens, are violent. And what it basically said is, if Social Security Administration decides you're mentally incapable of handling your financial affairs, we'll report you to the instant background check. How is that casting I know you're not representing the Civil Liberties, we invited them, by the way, they didn't have a person there. How is saying an individual, based on our analysis, doesn't have the mental capability to handle their finances a mark on all people with mental health issues? I don't understand that at all.
I don't think it is. Let me tell you what I think the concern is. The concern is that we begin to encroach into a territory where we punish people for prospective criminality. And that's one of the things that civil libertarians worry about and lose sleep about and that sort of thing. So if it doesn't go that far, then I think it is constitutionally acceptable.
There are 5 states, from my understanding, Connecticut, California, Indiana, Oregon, and Washington, have so-called red flag laws, Chief. And what it basically says, and there's one pending in Massachusetts, one of 18 states, allows families or law enforcement officials to go to court to seek these extreme risk protection orders, under which they say a person is at risk of harming him or herself or others, and as a result, we want an order that doesn't allow them to possess a gun. One could argue that might have been helpful in the situation in Florida, which is not of such a law. Would that be helpful to you in your work?
Well, honestly, it would, but at the same time, I think in this state, we have something known as suitability.
What does that mean?
Well, the police chiefs ordinarily are the licensing authorities. They give out the licenses to carry. So if we have information that comes in front of us where we think that someone is at risk to either hurt themselves or somebody else, we can deem them to be unsuitable. We can suspend or revoke their license ASAP.
Retroactively. So you don't even need this.
Well, I mean, honestly, we really don't.
Do you have a problem with the current state of affairs or these red flag laws? I mean, a court still ultimately has to make the determination, neither the police nor the family. Because currently, I assume most people know at home, if someone's involuntarily committed, then likely to getting a gun is very small, or at least the law would allow them to be denied. Do you have a problem with a family member or law enforcement going to court to get one of these extreme risk orders?
I don't have a problem with someone going to court, and if court of competent jurisdiction says the standards are met, I am 100% okay with it. What I will say, and I hope the chief agrees with me, I think that if there were more resources for better on-the-street training of officers to divert things to the mental health system earlier on, as opposed to a very blunt instrument, the criminal system, I think that we can address some of the root causes of the big actions that you just showed on the screen a lot earlier on.
Your colleague, the commissioner in Boston, Evans, tells us all the time, more social workers going out. You agree with what Ron and he has said?
100%. So we have a team in Chelsea. It's known as the Chelsea Hub. We have about 20 players at the table. We meet once a week. We actually have mental health has one of the seats. So we have individuals that we identify. Usually the police department and the school department are the feeders for this team. And we have individuals that come to, they have these high risk indicators. And we believe that we need to connect them to services. Mental health is part of that solution. Right. We try to work proactively before something like this happens.
Yeah, that's the way it has to happen, Ron. Nice
Thanks
to see you, Chief.
Right.
It's good to meet you.
Thank you. Good to meet you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.